Mr. President, we have a sellout crowd. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of Kenya. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. It's such an enormous pleasure to welcome you here, sir. I would like to also give a special welcome to the Honorable Kyle Mccarter, Mr. Ambassador, who has made the trip from Kenya, our U.S. Ambassador to Kenya. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being here. Kenya is among the most important U.S. allies in Africa. I think it's one of our more important allies in the world, for many reasons. An anchor of stability in the volatile horn of the African region, it has remained an invaluable partner to the United States in the fight against al-Shabaab, committing thousands of troops to the African Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia and working with all stakeholders to stabilize the region. And I think this gets to the heart of this importance because there is a regional vision on behalf of this leader. Despite regular terrorist attacks on Kenyan soil and unprecedented instability across much of the Horn, Kenya has emerged as an economic, as a commercial, and as a logistics hub of the East Africa region, and a global leader in the development of mobile money and financial inclusion. 80% of regional trade flows through Kenya's Mombasa port. And the country's dynamic private sector, its highly skilled workforce, its steadily improving infrastructure lead companies to choose Nairobi rather than neighboring capitals as a regional base. The two countries, it has been reported in the media, may well soon announce negotiations on a free trade agreement. It would be the first U.S. such deal with a sub-Saharan African country. But more than that, it really underscores the recent political, and talk toward this goal, underscores the recent political, structural, and economic reforms that have moved Kenya a full 80 places up the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, further improving the country's attractiveness as a destination for foreign investment. Recognizing Kenya's role as a key regional actor, the United States elevated its bilateral relationship with Kenya to a more ambitious strategic partnership 2 years ago, with commitments made to advance counter-terrorism collaboration, defense and security cooperation, and commercial relations. Last year, both countries initiated a series of joint quarterly regional strategic reviews, with the first dialogue, which took place last May in Nairobi, chaired by our very own Dr. J. Peter Pham, acting in his U.S. government capacity. And Peter, it's just terrific to have you here today. Kenya's strengthening relationship with the United States comes at a time when African nations are pulling together to form the first continent-wide free trade zone, but also as democratic norms are weakening in many places. Kenya's historically strong commitment to democracy since the departure from office of longtime President Daniel Arap Moi, who passed away this week, so poignantly exemplified in the post-election reconciliation following the 2017 crisis. And it shows, again, another reason why it makes Kenya such a vital partner of the United States in East Africa. As Kenya weighs significant changes to the political order ahead of elections scheduled for 2022, the U.S.-Kenya relationship might just be at the strongest point in history. And I thank you, Mr. President, for speaking here at this tremendous moment in your country's history and in the history of our bilateral relations. I just want to add one other detail. There are many experts on Kenya and on Africa in the room. There are some who are less so. The experts will know this, others may not. But Uhuru Kenyatta is the first son of Jomo Kenyatta. I think most of you know that, the country's founding president. But he was born during the days of independence, and his name, his first name, means freedom in Swahili. With that, it is my distinct honor to welcome His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, to the stage. Mr. President, the podium is yours.
Thank you all. Good morning, everybody. Well, Mr. Fred Kemp, President of the Atlantic Council, officials of the United States government, led by my good friend Peter, members of the Council, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again, and let me, at the very onset, thank the Atlantic Council for putting together this forum in order to allow me an opportunity to have a conversation with you. Indeed, by the time I finish my very short remarks, my hope is that I will have been able to argue effectively that Africa has immense strategic importance to the security and prosperity of the transatlantic alliance, and that the Atlantic Council, which was founded basically on the premise of advancing that transatlantic alliance. Indeed, let me say that from the very onset, I have with us Ambassador Martin Kimani here, who is an officer in our government, similar to Peter here, who at one time or another was with the council and now work with governments. I don't know what they prefer, but we do know that you have the capacity to produce great thinkers and indeed great actors. Ladies and gentlemen, this think tank came into being to consolidate the peace following the World War II. And 2 years after the founding of Kenya, we attained our independence from the British. Our struggle and the World War both played a part in weakening the colonial enterprise, and Kenyans, and indeed many Africans, are fully aware of the position that the United States took with the freedom-loving people of the African continent. Our struggle for independence occurred in lock and step with your country's campaign for full civil rights for your citizens. And in the end, we won our freedom, and you in the United States advanced your democracy. Those early years of our independent life also brought us very close to the United States, with people like Thurgood Marshall, who helped us write our very first independence constitution. We had Barack Obama's father, who left our shores supported by American benefactors to pursue knowledge, and ended up gaining it, but on top of it, gaining a son who would one day be the President of the United States. Kenya looked to the United States for democracy and to build the prosperity that we needed to combat poverty, disease, and ignorance. And indeed, much was achieved. However, as the 60s progressed and your Cold War with the Soviet Union escalated, our region became a proxy ground for that conflict. The Cold War led to many hot wars, revolutions, and coups in our region and in the African continent. We in Kenya tried to chart a careful path between two battling giants, but it was very difficult and in many ways affected our politics and our stability across the African continent. Truth be told, that democracy retreated in many parts of Africa, and an authoritarianism arose that exploited the Cold War to entrench itself. Our leaders failed to succeed in building strong economies, and we watched as Asian countries that had started off poorer than some of us became rich in less than 2 generations. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am returning to this history because I believe we must never again be drawn into the mistakes that have been made in the past. You here at the Atlantic Council and your audience must integrate our place in your strategic schemes as more than just a continent producing security threats or unregulated migration that must be countered. We must begin to look at Africa as the world's biggest opportunity. And I believe that if you can dare to look at it with a fresh eye and with a keen sense of history, we can achieve this. And my presence here today is to say that Kenya can be a key country in converting that opportunity into mutual gain. Indeed, I've noticed in the conversations in Western countries and their counterparts in Asia and the Middle East a return to competition over Africa. In some cases, weaponizing divisions, pursuing proxy actions, and behaving like Africa is for the taking. Well, I want to tell you it is not. If you understand the opportunity, I believe you will seek to grow strong partnerships driven by collaborative and generous principles. Very much like the values that guided the United States' engagement with Europe after World War II. To grasp this opportunity, you will need to listen and engage with what we in Africa want and what we in Africa need. Let me try to match your opportunity to ours in just 2 very few standout areas, namely prosperity and security. The first is that there is a lot of capital in the United States and Europe that is seeking greater yield in developing markets with aging populations. Who will find the growth? Who will fund the growth that these citizens will need when retirement comes after a lifetime of hard work, and who are keen to enjoy their retirement years? On the flip side of the coin, you have Africa, that has the world's youngest and fastest growing population. On top of that, the most unexploited land for agriculture, immense mineral wealth, and a large consumer market. I believe we must tap into these assets to create decent jobs for millions of our young people. We must become wealthy enough as countries to provide the health, education, and security that will sustain democracy, stability, and strong public support for business and free trade. Ladies and gentlemen, Africans are not standing still. We are integrating. In our region, East Africa, but more so, the Continental Free Trade Agreement that I believe will be a game changer. Today, there is a marked desire among a good number of my fellow African leaders to seek decisive change in how Africa engages the world. We want partners who are walking in the same direction as we are. Kenya is moving aggressively to bring our infrastructure up to date. Our population in Kenya is probably amongst the best educated in the region and arguably in the African continent. We are today making big investments in building technical skills, attacking corruption, lowering barriers to doing business, and stabilizing our democratic politics. We are not just a gateway. We are a platform of skills, entrepreneurship, stability, and the rule of law. And that is why I am greatly looking forward to making early and an ambitious start to arrangements for the foreseen end of the AGOA program in the year 2025. And I hope that all of you will support a process that shows how long-term mutual benefit can deliver in a way that clearly supports Africa's integration and prosperity agenda. Indeed, it is early days, but I strongly believe that we have an opportunity to show the way forward, together as Kenya and the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, the second area is in protecting the security of our peoples. We have a lot of young people. They see on their social media what your youth see here. They listen to the same music, aspire to the very same consumption. Your young people here have almost full employment with which to satisfy their desires and their ambitions. Millions of ours are unemployed and unable to match their expectations. It is an unsustainable situation, and if this reality does not change quickly, we will produce in Africa many security crises that will leave no corner of this globe untouched. There are also ideological extremists opposed deeply to democracy, the West, unity across ethnic, religious, and racial barriers. Alongside these, there are criminals that operate across boundaries, ready to traffic our youth, no matter what barriers are erected against the flow. The extremists, militants, and criminals are already uniting to seriously challenge the continuity of states in many parts of Africa and the world. We, together, will never realize the immense wealth we can build together or hope to hold on the little that we have if African states remain relatively weak and vulnerable to these destructive actors. The secure and rules-based global order that can assure your security and prosperity has to be built on a patchwork of effective, stable, and secure states governed in an inclusive and participatory manner. Your aid programs and development programs and norm must promote and must do more to support stronger states and not to unintentionally dovetail with destabilizing factors. You will also advance your own interests if again you listen to Africans more keenly, resist being drawn into proxy struggles with other global powers, and genuinely work with these countries or with those countries that are determined to emerge as African lions in the next few years. You can also make your financial centers and institutions inhospitable to illegal and illicit financial flows out of Africa. This is a major reason that Kenya has been signing agreements with countries to ensure that the corrupt do not easily transfer their ill-gotten wealth abroad. a crucial role that you can play is ensuring that regional and international terrorist groups do not hold any territory in Africa. As has been observed, they can start in one country, but have a tendency to mutate across borders and indeed become very destructive. A good start to this is Al-Shabaab. We must continue to work together as Kenya and the United States, together with other regional players, to surge our military efforts against the group, to offer room for a workable political consensus in Somalia. This group's ability to raise finances through contraband and its penetration of businesses and even public sector bodies in Somalia must be challenged at every turn. We are already ramping up an aggressive posture against contraband in our country. The effort to defeat the group would be helped immensely by compliance to countering terrorism financing, fighting money laundering, and other international obligations against terrorism are observed. Regionally, and in Somalia specifically, where the core of the challenge exists, institutions like the Atlantic Council can do a lot to push against agendas that insist democracy is a one-size-fits-all outfit that ends up deeply undermining the sustained strengthening of democracy. I want to be clear here, and please, all of you note that I do not mean we should agree that authoritarian or dictatorial regimes that announce themselves should be taken at their word. The point is that we must give countries the room to engineer new approaches that support and extend democracy in line with their respective realities. It requires being more nuanced in how we make judgments about politics and the resulting interventions that countries like the United States should undertake. In Kenya, for example, political, social, and governance engineering is what we are embarking on in Kenya with our Building Bridges initiative. I will discuss it more at the National Prayer Breakfast Luncheon later this afternoon. And indeed, I do hope that some of you will be in attendance. In a nutshell, the Building Bridges initiative, as we call it in Kenya, is a homegrown solution for a divisive political culture that has often sparked electoral crises over the last 30 years. And its intention is to advance three goals. The first, to preempt any further escalation in the cycle of no-holds-barred political competition by taking early and decisive action to reach out across the aisle. I did this with the Honorable Raila Odinga in March of 2018, at a time when few in Kenya or anywhere imagined that this was possible. The second is to use inclusivity to strengthen the center of politics, which is necessary for democracy in our country to be successful. That center is identified by being able to manifest the qualities of moderation, pragmatism, and a willingness to compromise. Our stepping forward toward one another, without doubt, has helped us disorient the politics of extremism and division. The third is to ensure that the strengthened and more stable center is able to deliver bold reforms that advance inclusion, economic uplift, counters corruption, and strengthens our institutions. So, as a think tank, I believe that you as a council should delve deeper into our Building Bridges initiative process. It is not as simple as it looks, and we have found a number of countries seeking to learn from it in trying to re-engineer their politics and social contracts. We have been open in sharing, and in time, I believe that this may emerge as a unique model that can be adopted and domesticated elsewhere on the African continent. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I believe that the United States must dare to imagine and support African-driven solutions. We, together, have the most to gain in making Africa work for its people. I could go on, but I also want to hear what you have to say and to respond to some of your questions. So please allow me to close there, hoping and believing that I have provided you with the encouragement to look at Africa afresh and with a much more open mind. Once again, Mr. President, I thank you and I thank the Atlantic Council for this opportunity. Thank you very much. I didn't know I was coming back up here.
Righty. Thank you. Excellency, thank you for those illuminating remarks, and thank you for joining us. The Atlantic Council is truly honored by your visit. My name is Bronwyn Bruton. I'm Director of Programs and Studies here at the Africa Center, and I have the pleasure of moderating your conversation with the audience today. In a few minutes, I'll be turning to you for your questions, but I did want to spend a few moments delving further into the subject of Kenya's economy. Before doing that, two quick things. First and foremost, I wish to express my condolences on the death of President Moi. This is a somber moment for Kenya, but also a reminder of how far the country has traveled. Second, a happy note, I hope, is that Mr. Gabriel Nagatu, a close friend of Kenya's from the African Development Bank, has agreed to join the Africa Center as our newest senior fellow. Thank you. Excellent. So, Excellency, this is a very proud and exciting moment for Kenya. Rumor has it that you're in Washington to do something specific. Haven't quite heard what that is. However, needless to say that this is a welcome development. Those of us who've been working on the continent for many, many years have, in fact, I think, been suffering a little bit of a sense of disappointment. Because when you look across the continent, though there are many small, bright spots, looking at the 5 largest economies, South Africa is deep in recession. Nigeria is experiencing growing poverty. Angola seems stuck in oil dependency at a time of declining oil prices. And even Ethiopia, a true lion for growth, is faced with what may well be an existential political crisis. At this moment, the emergence of Kenya as a standard bearer for growth is truly welcome. That being said, even inside of Kenya, there are growing pains. Your administration has rightly invested very heavily in infrastructure, public housing, health, your big 4 priorities. And as a consequence, there's pressure on the budget, and I think some concerns that Kenya too may be subject to a little bit less growth than investors would like to see. Do you mind sharing your vision for maintaining growth over the next few years?
Thank you. I think the first point to note is that for us to be able to successfully succeed, and I just want to go back to the statement that I made earlier, we must accept that we have to first and foremost design a social contract with our people that best fits our particular circumstance, and to acknowledge that standard democracy in a time of growing nationalism and ethnic tensions, we need to be able to look at that from a different angle. And that's why we're saying, for example, democracy first past the post in Kenya has proved to be not only not unsuccessful but unsustainable. And that is why we're trying to engage each other to see how we can come up with a social contract that always allows for inclusivity, so that there are no groups or regions that feel left out. That social political stability is fundamental for us to grow a sustainable development path, or a sustainable economic path with sustainable and progressive growth. And if you look at some of the crises that you're seeing emerging in different parts of the country, is that we looked at their economies, but once the political factors kicked in, they're struggling. We in Kenya want to flip that over. We want to say that yes, we are interested in economic development, economic growth, but we, more importantly, want to fix the social political contract, because that is the foundation that presents future stability. So our key focus, number one, is that. And that's why we're also saying we want to now begin engaging the world on that basis. That is why we're saying there was a time, especially when our countries were being founded, where the American principle and love for freedom and democracy saw you grant a lot of support to those of us who were struggling and fighting against colonialism and for our independence. And thereafter, very strong support for our economic agenda. A lot of the companies that first set foot in independent Africa were largely American companies that saw themselves, coming through. We want to again renew that contract, and to recognize that, yes, if we want sustainable economies, we need to be able to do so not just depending on the public sector, which puts strains and stresses on our budgets and so forth, but to re-engage once again with the private sector. And that is why I'm saying there is huge scope for great returns, right? Especially here in America, as populations age, right? You want better returns for your pensions. You want better returns, and there can be no better place for that investment than in Africa. And that investment also then in turn helps us achieve the key pillars that we want to achieve for our people: housing, job security, food security, right? And health for a younger, growing population that also serves as a humongous market opportunity for American goods and services. That is your new growth horizon. So we're here first and foremost to strengthen that partnership between our two governments, as you have said, that has been elevated to a higher level, but with a clear understanding that for us to be able to achieve our economic agenda, maintain the growth rates that we want to deepen our partnership with private sector by granting them opportunities for them to be able to come in, help us achieve the key priorities that we need, but also give great and ample return for the investments that they themselves are making.
Thank you. So you've mentioned the aspirations of the African people. So I'll jump on that for that train for a moment. There are unconfirmed rumors, and you know how much we hate unconfirmed rumors in Washington, that you are here in pursuit of a bilateral trade deal with the United States. And you've also had bilateral trade conversations with Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain about the possibility of a post-Brexit trade agreement. Some have expressed concerns that while the aspirations of the African people, the hopes of the African people are firmly fixed on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, Kenya is in fact striking out on its own path in pursuing these bilateral agreements and may inadvertently undermine the negotiating power of the East African bloc or the momentum towards the Continental Free Trade Agreement. How would you respond to those concerns?
First and foremost, I can neither confirm nor deny the rumors. But I can say that as a country, we are very keen to seeing a deepening of the trade between our two countries. And I don't believe that a deepening of trade between our two nations threatens anything. You know, we've always got to remember that as a continent, we are not homogeneous. We're not all at the same level of development. We have the same aspirations, but we are at different places in terms of where our respective economies are. And what we are saying as Kenya, right, is that some are more ready than others to begin this process. And I don't believe that this process should be looked at as a process of Kenya breaking away, but rather Kenya taking a first step and trying to navigate through that process of deepening engagements outside of the African continent that ultimately tomorrow can become learning steps and make the process easier for others of the African continent. So it's not that we're breaking away. We're saying Kenya wants to be a pace setter, right? If you remember last year when we broke the 2-hour marathon, yeah? Kipchoge succeeded, right? Because he had pace setters, right? So all we're saying is that Kenya wants to be a pace setter, right? And just set the ball rolling and set the path so that, you know, others will go again. So I am completely not on that page of that we are breaking up. We are definitely not breaking away. Kenya has no intention whatsoever being one of the first countries on the African continent not only to sign but to ratify the Africa Free Trade Agreement. So 40% of our own trade as a country is with our region. So we recognize the importance of maintaining regional integration and regional trade. But we're saying that, you know, others should also say that if Kenya is actually ready, yeah, and others may not be as ready, yeah, let us be the pace setters, let us set the path, yeah, and others can, you know, learn from our mistakes, so to say. Yeah?
That is a diplomatic way of putting it. So I thought that I detected a note of warning in your opening remarks when we referred to certain countries using Africa as a battlefield for proxy disputes. And of course, I don't know that you are alluding to the United States and China, but most assuredly, our former ambassador, John Bolton, wrote a national security strategy for Africa that very clearly identified the African continent primarily as a theater for the economic competition with China. And in fact, he referred to much of the Chinese infrastructure lending that has powered African growth as a debt trap. What is your strategy for negotiating the competition between the US and China? Is it possible for African nations to have two best friends, in your view?
Indeed so. I see no threat in that, because first and foremost, we recognize that the United States and China are also in the process of negotiating, with each other, right? And I think what everybody is really looking out for is everybody wants a great deal for themselves, right? And I believe that if we are able to actually look at it from that perspective, there is room enough, for all of us. We are very concerned about going back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and that era of Cold War where, you had to choose which side you want to be on. We don't want to be forced to choose. We want to work with everybody, and we believe that there is opportunity for everybody. There are those areas indeed where, America stands out and has much better strengths in certain fields. Yeah. On the other hand, you have the Chinese who build hospitals in 7 days. Yeah? So we believe that there are strengths that can come out, on either side, and I don't think it's right nor just to take us back to that period of tension. If you also look at, unfortunately, what's happening even in other countries where, and it's not just the US and China, you have other countries, unfortunately, also playing out their own proxy wars, and in some cases with very disastrous effects. Somalia, as an example. A lot of the problems that are occurring in Somalia are a direct result of proxy wars. In Somalia, look at Yemen, look at... these are the things that we're saying that we need to be able to say, look, this world, and that's going to be part of my message tomorrow at prayer breakfast and this afternoon, this world is big enough for all of us. We just need to sit down and find out that how do we establish win-win partnerships. I think that's what President Trump is trying to look for people in the Americas. They're saying that we are happy to deal and to trade with the world, but we want, to get the best possible deal for Kenya, be it with China, be it with Canada, be it with Mexico. So Kenya too is saying that we want the best deal that we can have for our citizens, be it with whoever we're dealing with, and that's why I will neither confirm nor deny your rumors.
And I was hoping for a scoop. Yeah. So I'm about to turn over to the audience, but you did mention the hospital that was built in 7 days. And in addition to the world being large enough for all of us, it's also painfully small.
Absolutely.
The Financial Times had a story today on White House concerns about the coronavirus in Africa, and in particular the fact that Ethiopian Airways is still flying its direct flights in and out of several cities of China. Can you tell us briefly, because it is such a matter of economic concern to Kenya, 63% of your GDP comes from services, the bulk of that from tourism. So coronavirus is a present threat that's probably greater than Al-Shabaab.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us about what preparations you're making?
Well, for starters, we have made it clear that we have to do everything that we can to protect both our citizens and the fact that Kenya itself is a regional hub. So by protecting our citizens, by extension, we're also saying that, we also want to ensure that that virus also doesn't spread within the region and etc. So we have put in place in measures, and we've made it clear that we have stopped our flights into Chinese cities. We're not saying that this is for or against anybody. There's no politics here. We don't have the capacity to build hospitals in 7 days. Right? So we must do everything that we can within the limited resources to ensure that we keep this virus completely away. So we have put in place measures where we are screening all passengers coming into the country who have any potential of having either come direct, which is no longer possible, but even if it is via transit, coming in from that region. We are working, because we've also got a number of students, to see how we can support them and find how they can also, and when they do come, and if they insist they are coming, ensuring that they are put in quarantine for the required 14-day period to ensure that they are also not going to spread that virus around. And like I said, we have weaker, and I think Dr. Tedros made it very clear when he said that the biggest worry here is not about China being unable to manage the virus, but it's about that virus coming into areas that have weaker health systems. So we must therefore do and take much more stringent measures to ensure that we don't allow that virus to come through, and we do hope that even our brothers and sisters in Ethiopia will also realize the same and come to terms with that fact, because it has nothing to do with our relationship with any country. It is about protecting our citizens. It is about protecting people from the risk of infection.
Yeah. That is reassuring, and I wish us all well in this process. I'm going to turn to the audience, and I'd like to give the honor of the first question to a person you know very well, the Honorable former Ambassador to the U.S. Ambassador to Kenya, Mr. Mark Bellamy. There's a microphone.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for being here today. It's very, very nice to see you again. I was very interested in your remarks just now about BBI, the Building Bridges Initiative. I think for many of us, it appears as a bold effort, really, to bridge some of these deep, historic, partisan divides. And it's pretty easy to see how this connects with your development and economic goals. But you also spoke of inclusivity and outreach, and made it clear there's also a political dimension to this. And I wonder if you could share with us your thinking about what are your political goals in this? What would you like to see as a good political outcome for the BBI initiative?
I think what I can say is a good political outcome is a scenario. You know Kenya well. There was a tremendous fight in the late 80s, which ended up in 1992, changed the Section 2A to allow multipartyism. And what I have been telling people since then, you can take a look at any election, the election of 92, where our former president, formed a government which is actually a minority government if you take in terms of popular vote, because he had about, 30% of the total vote. Come to 97, right? Again, I think it was even slightly lower, but it was just that the opposition itself was split, yeah? In fact, the only time in the history of our multi-party era where the combined joint opposition came together was to defeat me in 2002, right? Where you can say that they won with about 65 to almost 70% majority. Because then you come back to 2010, again it was 50-50. 2013, 50-50. 2017, 50-50. So it's basically not sustainable. And that's why there is always room for people to dispute elections. So therefore, what we're saying is that the model of first past the post then, yeah, is not effectively working for us as Kenya. We have to look for a different model that allows much greater inclusion, so that it's not winner take it all. Huh? I don't want to, at this stage, frame and say, this is what I want to see. Huh? Because the minute, you know Kenyan politics, the minute this is what the president wants, then you'll find another person say, now I want this. And so all we're saying is we want a process that will be accepted by the majority as being a process that is not only fair, transparent, but also inclusive, right? And I believe that with the way we're going, we will come up with a formula that allows us to achieve that. All I'm saying is I don't want to say that I own the formula, this is what I want, because then everybody will say, oh, you see, he's pushing his own agenda. We will come together and like I'm saying, have a process that is fair, that is transparent, but that is also inclusive. Right? I think those are the three. We've always talked about fair and transparent. Now we have added that third category, which is inclusive, right? And I think that's what we need to focus ourselves on, and we are focusing ourselves on.
Thank you. I'm going to take a round of 3 questions. Please wait for the microphone. Please state your name and affiliation, and please don't make a speech. Actually, I'm going to go in the back, this gentleman right here.
Your Excellency, it's a great honor for me to have the opportunity to address you. Thank you to the Atlantic Council. My name is Tababu Asafa. I'm an immigrant, resident of the United States from Ethiopia originally, but I finished high school in Kenya, so Kenya raised me. So part of me is a Kenyan. I'm going to pose my question on twofold. First, the African immigrant community in the US is very vibrant. We're close to 5 million currently with second and third generation. Even though we're doing good in the US, we have affiliation to Africa. We want to matter in Africa. Currently, the current US-Africa policy is Prosper Africa, two-way engagement for mutual benefit. It means a lot to me. When I hear a conversation about US-Africa partnership, it's always Americans doing business in Africa. What about me raising African business in the US? Because significant part of our problem is the marginalization of our presence in the global market. Me and my wife and my 2 friends, my wife, my 3 friends, have for the last 15 years developed a new international trade geared toward development we call Benefit Cooperation for Africa.
Verging into speech territory,
Benefit
so
Cooperation for Africa. In that context, I've given 400,000 small coffee farmers in Ethiopia an opportunity to invest $6 so they take a significant part of the business on this side. I would like to do the same for the Kenyan tea growers. The question is, what is your government going to do to allow African diaspora to come play a role in growing African business on this side? Thank you, and I'm sorry for the long question.
That's a terrific question. Can I have a lady in the audience? Any ladies? Oh, come on, ladies, really? There's this lady right here. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Your Excellency, I wanted to just ask about what it is that the private sector can do, Corporate Council on Africa and the private sector can do to help you grow what I have personally seen in terms of your AGOA production. I've been to many facilities, I've been to cut flower farms, et cetera. And how can we support you going further in the last 5 years of AGOA, but also beyond that in terms of this new arrangement that nobody will say is happening, but we all know is happening. How can we support you in the private sector? How can Corporate Council on Africa be a partner of yours in that? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Fott.
Yeah, Mr. President, welcome to Washington. My name is Melvin Foote. I'm the president of the Constituency for Africa, which is a political advocacy organization here in Washington. I spent many years in the Horn of Africa, so I know Kenya very well. I have it many tuskers under the thorn tree. My question, I know you're going to talk about trade and investment. I know you're going to talk about political issues concerning Kenya. My question has to do with the issues of climate change. I hear about locust infestation in the region. I hear about the coronavirus. I hear about the crop failing in Kenya, in many parts of Kenya. The rains are coming when it should be dry, and that sort of thing. So the farmers are going to be off. What are you dealing with? What are you doing to deal with these social issues in the region? They're not your issue. They're issues of climate change. Where do you stand on climate change? I would be interested to hear some of that thought. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I think the first question was growing African business in the United States. We would be more than happy to work and to collaborate with our African diaspora who are doing business in here, especially those who wish to set up, as the example that you have given, industries or businesses that are geared towards the promotion of African products into the United States. I hear what you're doing for coffee farmers in Ethiopia. We have in Minnesota some Kenyans who live there who are also doing the same for African coffee, out there as well. So we would be more than happy. You understand this market better than we do. You understand the African continent. We would be more than willing to partner and work together to help you grow your businesses, because by growing your businesses, you're also helping us grow our trade with the United States and supporting our farmers in the same process. So this is something that we'd be keen on. I think the second question was from my good friend who we worked on AGOA for many, many years. And thank you for your great work.
You didn't say my name. Everybody said I should have said I'm Florida.
Yeah. But we also have to look at the realities. 2025 is around the corner, and there are no indications that there will be another AGOA, so we must prepare ourselves. And what Kenya is doing is preparing herself for that future. As you well know, through that particular process of AGOA, we've managed to grow our business tremendously. We now have almost 100,000 Kenyans who are employed thanks to AGOA, and it's been growing year on year on year. But we wanted to even go the next to the next step, and it can't be hinged on uncertainty. It must be some certainty, and I think the African Council can play a tremendous role in helping American companies especially focus themselves on the key areas. If it's the health sector and medical equipment, they're areas where America is far outperforms companies from any other part of the world, and those are areas that we would like you to deepen through Kenya. Your partnership. You also understand what we have been able to produce, if it's in the textile industries and etc. How again can we create those ties between American firms and Kenyan firms that are involved in these various businesses? So for us, the council continues to be a critical, and I hope will continue to be a critical partner in helping us achieve our objectives. My friend, climate change is real. We are very clear on that, and I was telling some people yesterday, we are here now in January. You say you know Africa very well. You're two gentlemen sitting side by side. You know it very well. This is our driest month of the year, ordinarily. Yeah. It now happens to be the wettest month that we have ever experienced, and this is the reason we're having, all the locusts, etc., because climate change is real, and we in Kenya have made our position, very clear on that. We have been in the forefront of trying to get anybody who will listen, yeah, to understand that. We participate in all forums. But you know, at the end of the day, our mouth may not necessarily be as big as our pockets. We just need the whole world to come together and pull from the same wavelength. We need the world to come together on this, because at the end of the day, it's the world that's going to suffer. It's not just going to be Africa. It's not just going to be Kenya. And we're not going to win this war individually. It must be a collective battle if we are to succeed, and if we are to stop these tremendously negative impact of this global
Please convey
phenomenon.
that to President Trump if you have the opportunity.
That I will play my part. That is something I have to do, because we believe it, and like I'm saying, we're living it. We are actually living it. Yeah? And we can't run away from that fact.
So, Excellency, our time with you has flown as fast as I knew it would. So please, on behalf of Fred Kemp, J. Peter Pham, and our audience, allow me to thank you for your wonderful comments and your presence here. We wish you great fortune. Thank you.